there, woman beings, and welcome back to Season 3 of the Woman Being Podcast.
Woo!
Today, as always, I am here with my co-host, Emma.
Hello, folks. Happy to be back.
And
That's
Kelly.
cool.
Hello.
And of course, I am Kelly and your host for today's episode. We decided, considering it's Season 3, we were just going to kick it off with busting some myths about feminism. So grab a beverage, have a seat, and get ready because we're just going to dive right in. This is Woman Being,
where we explore thoughts and opinions
And have the freedom to change our minds.
without expectation or judgment.
We will hold a safe space and support each other.
As we navigate together in the form of feminine.
Hello, ladies.
Hi.
Happy Saturday.
Hi. Hello.
Happy to be here.
Happy Saturday to you, us right now. And then happy whatever day the listener is listening.
Whatever day it freaking is.
Whatever day, whatever time, week, month, I don't know. We're going to be talking about some weird, maybe not weird, stuff today. And it's focused around like misconceptions or myths about feminism. So we're just going to start it off with pretty simple question. What is your personal definition of feminism? Maybe it's not simple.
Oh, I think it's both simple and complex. Kellyanne. I think it is all of the above.
You would.
I would say that my personal definition of feminism is also pretty much in line with what I think a lot of people agree the definition of feminism is, which is essentially advocacy for equality for all. Advocacy for equality specifically related to gender and sex-based discrimination, and for people to be on equal footing across the board in politics and society, in the workplace, in laws, and in the way that they're treated day to day, all the above. That's feminism.
So
Excellent.
good. Mine is all the more simple, yet all the more complex.
You would one
which
up me.
is just a movement that advocates for equality and equity for all, regardless of gender or sex.
Excellent.
That is the end.
Love it.
How about you?
Mine is pretty straightforward and simple, but it's just the strive for equality for everyone, essentially. I think it's definitely, feminism started very female-focused, right? Like, friggin' let us wear pants, let us vote, let us own property, things like that, basic human rights. But from there, it's kind of evolved into a larger conversation of like, well, there's a lot of people that don't experience equality in many different ways. And it's actually important that we create an equal society for everyone.
And how can we dismantle systemic, methods and norms that are in place that prevent women and other underrepresented genders from being able to pursue happiness,
Absolutely.
as is their human right.
Right. It's about humanity.
Yes.
I think that's the bottom line. It's like, you're a person, I'm a person, we equally deserve a shot and a happy life. So pretty simple, but also obviously hits a lot of areas of our world and lives. So I understand what you mean, Emma, by both being simple and complex.
But I think a lot of people have differing opinions or understandings about what feminism means, or maybe about the connotations that surround feminism, which can often lead to sort of interpretations that may think feminism means like women being in power and men being pushed away or out of the conversation, or I don't know, men suck, women are great.
Totally. Yeah.
Get out of the way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's why I wanted to start with what our definitions of feminism is, because there seem to be quite a few definitions that kind of float around, or misconceptions or myths, if you will, about the intention of feminism. You will.
Yes.
Excellent. That kind of float around out there, and it's like, ooh, we just want to like take some time to like express what our situation is, especially being a female-focused podcast, right?
Yes.
Yeah,
so
sort of gives the baseline of where we're coming from.
absolutely. So of course we had to do a poll.
We had
Had to do a poll.
How could we not?
And where did we put that poll, I wonder?
On Instagram. So
Instagram.
you should be following our Instagram because we're constantly putting lots of fun stuff up there. We're getting lots of recommendations from you, and you get to join the conversation, which is what this podcast is also about.
Wow, sounds like a fun time. I'm going to follow at Woman Being Podcast on Instagram right now. And you should too.
You could also find us on TikTok at Woman Being Podcast.
Shameless plug. I love it.
And YouTube, Woman Being Podcast.
But we don't, I guess, conversationally, in terms of if you want to interact with us, Instagram's the place to be.
Yeah.
You can find us in other places, but we're not necessarily reaching out as much.
Follow them all.
But
Follow
them
all of them. And I will cash app you $1.
Maybe
We'll bribe you. Please.
Say thank you.
We're in the business of buying listeners. That's what we do.
So we did a poll, right?
We did.
On Instagram. And we did just a few simple questions. So we started out with, do you consider feminism to be a positive thing or a negative thing? And 78% of people said that they associate it as a positive thing. And then 22% of people said they associate it as a negative thing, which I felt like was a pretty good number.
That makes sense, especially considering our audience and the type of topics that we go after. It would make sense to me that a good majority of our audience considers feminism to be positive. I would assume. I don't know, but I mean, the numbers speak for themselves, I'm just saying. But
right.
But yeah, that's interesting that there's even like negative connotations around it even within our audience. So that's surprising to me a little bit, to be honest.
Which I think the circles I come from, at least, like feminism is still pretty much associated with a negative or as a negative thing. So I'm like, I'm aware of like people that don't think fondly of the feminist movement.
Yeah.
So
Well, and sometimes it's even the association of the word, but not necessarily even the concepts behind the word, right? Like there are plenty of people out there that support equality and want, equal opportunity for all, but don't necessarily like the connotations that come with the word feminism.
Or care for the label.
Yeah, I mean, I even at times hesitate to label myself as a feminist or to label our podcast as a feminist podcast when I'm describing it to people who have never heard it before, because I'm so aware of all those assumptions that will come along with it. I mean, in a similar way, I'm hesitant to tell people that I'm a Christian or to tell people that I'm vegan, because there's just so many assumptions that come with those words that are positive and negative. And so to put that label on is to put yourself under an umbrella and open to a lot of assumption and a lot of just like jumping to conclusions. So it definitely like makes sense that there's people that think of it in a negative way.
Totally. Yeah. We also asked a burning question of, do you think feminism leaves space for men? So I think this is an interesting question because you hear a lot of people talking about like, but what about the men? And some feminists are just like, I'm over talking about the men. They're fine. So we got some interesting results. So we've got 1 not really, 1 no, and 4 yeses. And then we've got some really awesome comments that people sent in. So one person said, it depends on the feminist, which I think I would agree. I think most things depend on the person, right? Like most vegans, like there's a variety of them, or Christians. There's like a million different sects of Christianity. Like, so I'm like, yeah, I get that. I really liked this response. Strong, self-assured men don't need to bring others down to make himself feel better. And I'm like, I agree. Actually, I would suggest that for most humans. I don't think strong, self-assured people should be bringing people down, period, to feel better about themselves. This is funny. I have never been asked to join the club, so maybe no.
Should we send out some invites?
We should send some invites. Woman Being has officially invited you, the listener, to join the feminist club if you would like. No pressure.
You can be a feminist if you want.
Of course, this is consensual.
You can be a feminist if you want to.
Listen to our episode about consent to hear all about how that works.
You can leave patriarchy behind.
There you go.
That was a man that said that, though.
That was a man.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, yeah, definitely. Feminism is open invite. Open
Yeah.
invite and also personal invite to you right now.
But I can also see how that might be like a little intimidating. Like,
Yeah, for
oh
sure.
my gosh, how do I, what am I participating in
Mm.
that's hurting women? And how do I advocate for women? Because it can be a rocky
Right.
journey.
And am I by default excluded because I'm a man?
Mhm.
And that could feel intimidating as well.
Yeah.
Totally.
But good news. The answer is that, yes, you can be a part of it.
Absolutely. Come join our club. So this was an interesting comment. I have seen feminism commonly push men out/down in order to make space for women. Yeah. And I'm like, I can see how there are some feminists that might have that as a byproduct, or maybe people feel unincluded. But I think the majority of feminists are very inclusive of men and aren't saying you can't be here. It's saying make space for us too. And maybe men feel uncomfortable at that adjustment. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
That's an interesting one because I think perception-wise, I can understand where that's coming from. Although I'm trying to think of times in which I personally have seen men pushed out to make space for women. You know, like I can see it in terms of like crazy feminists being portrayed on the news or on the internet, or maybe in conversation even, like men being like, you don't have a space to talk about this, like get out.
Yeah.
But like personally, the more I've dug into these topics, the more that I've understood the patriarchal kind of society that we live in and how it affects our daily lives, the more I've just seen women pushed out and lots of space being made for men. I think the perception can be that if we make space for women, then that's like a qualified man who didn't get an opportunity. But it ignores maybe like the swath of qualified women that are out there,
Right.
like waiting to take up space, and like how they've been restricted from presenting in whatever area it is due to their gender. So, I mean, like, yes and no. I don't know. I think I've seen it way more often the other way.
Totally.
I don't know.
Well, and it might hurt more for men because maybe they're not used to, like, nope, you don't get this, or you don't get this space, versus I feel like women kind of deal with that on the daily. And so it's like, it's more of an affront to them, potentially. I don't know. What are your thoughts, Em?
Yeah, I think that I'm hard-pressed to find examples of men who have practically been pushed out of positions of leadership and different things because they're men and to make room for women instead. I think that more and more women are being considered now who are, in fact, qualified for positions. More and more women are taking leadership roles in the business world, in politics, etc. And I don't think that means that men are being pushed out. I think it means that women are finally being considered who actually had the capability to do these things all along.
Yeah.
I don't personally know of a lot of examples of like quote unquote unqualified women coming into leadership positions just because they're women.
Yeah.
So I'd be curious to hear from this person what those examples are. It sounds like they've seen this happen a lot from their comment, and that's not something that I've seen.
Yeah.
I think that, it's this fallacy of the idea that people gaining rights and people gaining recognition means that it gets taken away from you. But that's actually not how it works. Like there actually is room for many people to have like the same rights and the same privileges that you have. That doesn't take them away from you. And like, I think that people get a little bit afraid of the idea of not being the default anymore. So I think that men who are opposed to feminism are afraid of the idea that they will not be getting things maybe as easily as they did before because they're not considered the default anymore.
Yeah.
And I think that's scary to them. But also I think that's something that they shouldn't have had in the first place, you know?
Right.
I also think that even if there are times that men have maybe been quote unquote disqualified because they're male, for the sake of like lifting a woman up for feminism, that doesn't disqualify the feminist movement as a whole. So, for example, right now we are actually seeing people's rights be taken away for the sake of Christian values, right? We're seeing that with Roe v. Wade being overturned. We're seeing Christian values being put as a large part of the reason why Roe v. Wade was overturned and why the anti-choice movement has been so potent. But that actually also takes away the rights of so many other people who are non-religious, who are of other religions, people who think that we should have access to the choice for abortive healthcare. But I would argue that just because there are Christian values that are behind a lot of the anti-choice movement, that doesn't disqualify the religion of Christianity from being a valid religion. You know, that doesn't disqualify the values and the teachings of the Christ. And that doesn't make me want to not be a Christian. Like, it actually makes me want to be a Christian even more because I want to propel the teachings of Christ that I think are valid and valuable. And so I think that to say like, oh, feminism is bad because I've seen men get pushed to the side, it's illogical in the sense that you're disqualifying an entire movement on the basis of certain instances or on the basis of certain sects of that movement.
Yeah.
So
when I think of what Ali Wong talked about, we reviewed her book. I can't remember the name right now. Dear Girls, in one of our episodes in season 1. And she talked about how a man approached her one time and said, another like comic who is white and male, and said, well, you're so lucky. You have so much more opportunity than I do because you're female and you're Asian. And she was like, what are you talking about? Like, and if you think about it really, the establishment, or at least the precedent that's set in many positions of leadership and celebrity culture, whatever, has made lots of space for white men who I know feel very attacked, I think, by that concept. But there's plenty of space for them to, like, they have heroes to look up to. They have connections that they can pull on. They have people to bring them into positions of leadership as it comes to shoulder rubbing and, like, whatever other systems that are in place that help people gain success. Allie has had to overcome not having all of those things. And if some of the concessions that have been made to allow more room for minority and females to gain the spotlight have helped her, that's like one small thing that has been on her side against all of the other many million things that have been against her being successful. So I think kind of the assumption that like minorities have a leg up because they're different or whatever is like, it's a little out of tune, I think.
Right.
It's just like not quite understanding the scope of what minorities and women go through to achieve and be successful in our society.
Yeah. I mean, it's like the fence analogy.
Yeah.
Like, if anyone's not familiar with it, it's the idea that if you have two people that are trying to look over a fence and one of them is already tall enough to look over the fence and one of them is not tall enough to look over the fence, you give the person who's not tall enough a stool so they can also look over the fence. Just because you're assisting them to look over the fence, that doesn't mean that this is like unfair. They're both getting the same view. And in that analogy, you can look at men as being the taller ones and women are the ones who are getting a stool because they've been already put at a state of disadvantage. And they still need to see over the fence. You could say the same about race. And it's ridiculous to think that just because this person got a stool that this other person should also get a stool.
Yeah, so they can be even taller and have an even better view. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, or sell the stool and make more money. No, I like what we're saying. I think overall it just kind of feels like maybe people get insecure about more competition. And I like what you said, Emma, of people get uncomfortable no longer being the default. And I think that's really true. And I think that applies to many areas, not just feminism. So our final comment on us asking if feminism leaves space for men was that as allies, I believe it's about equality for women, not inequality for men. And I couldn't agree more, honestly. Maybe we're shifting the focus to what it shouldn't be by saying like, oh, but like, what about the men? I'm like, the point isn't to like cast men out or push them aside. Right? The point is, how do we work together to build the best world we can for everyone?
Well, and I think I mean, I think, I don't know, maybe men who are like evil and want to maintain their power and not have equality for all are not in this camp. But I think generally most people would want equal opportunity for all, like good, like even playing fields for everybody.
Yeah.
And so the reason men need feminism, and the reason that there is space for men in feminism, and actually men are needed in feminism, is that in order for us to create a just society and a place where everyone wants to live and a place where we want our children to grow up, daughters and sons, we need equal playing field for them. Like, we want them to grow up learning how to respect their neighbor and love their neighbor and have honor and dignity for the people around them, regardless of gender. And so I think, yes, men who are looking for good opportunities for their daughters, for their sisters, for the people they care about the most, need feminism.
Yeah. I agree. Who would say, like, no, I don't want equality for women? Like, I mean, I know those people exist.
There are people,
most people, you're right.
Yeah.
They're like, yeah, of course I want women to have the opportunity.
I'd say most people in like the Western world would say that for sure.
Yeah, that's fair.
Besides the fact of like men needing feminism for the women in their life that they care about, but just men should want feminism because women are people, period. Like, regardless of whether they have any women that they care about in their life, they should care about like common decency for humanity. And I think there's actually this really great like Emma Watson speech where she talks about feminism, and she essentially invites men to the table. And obviously Emma Watson is amazing.
Literally iconic.
But she talks about how you can't have, like, how can you expect change to happen in the world if half of the people of the world are disqualified from contributing to that change, which is why we need men to be feminists. Like, and she essentially invites men, this is your formal invitation to be feminists now, because there's no way that we actually can do this without allies in men. And I think that that's similar with any cause in trying to lift up people who have been oppressed, lift up people who have been disqualified, is that you actually do need allies to come alongside you and to utilize the power that they've been given by default by society to contribute to that cause and to help create an equal distribution of power.
Yeah, and I think ultimately the more voices that are invited to the table, the more people that are able to contribute to a better society, the better society and more just society that we're going to have. And that's why I think like reframing what feminism really is about is really important, because it goes beyond like me as a white male, I'm not going to get an equal shot at whatever job because I am super qualified, but I'm, you know, stacked up against another qualified woman or minority. Like it goes beyond that, like one-on-one thing. I mean, those are the small things that do build up what we're talking about. But like feminism means that women across the world have access to education, that women across the world have access to period products so that they can go to school and go to work and aren't stuck at home unable to like make an income for, you know, like 20% of their life. Feminism means that we like fight against war and environmental practices and other things that are unjustly and disproportionately affecting women and their ability to actually contribute to society. Because I think my general belief, especially if you're coming from a Christian perspective, is this worldview that all nations come together and, you know, are under one roof and represented equally or whatever. I don't know exactly. I'm kind of like butchering a scripture from Hebrews, I think. Anyways. But if that is like your worldview, this idea of all nations coming together, then the fundamental like way of thinking that sort of builds that just society and that like homecoming of people together has to be in dismantling like systems that keep certain people wealthy and rich, and wealthy and rich are the same thing, but keep certain people wealthy and in power and keeps other people unable to access decent, basic human rights. If that makes any sense. I feel like I rambled there. I lost myself for a second. But
I followed. Yeah, I think allying with people. It's all very important.
Well, and it just goes beyond like, is feminism for me because it benefits me? And it goes into what does feminism mean for the world and the type of country that I want to live in, or the type of like city that I want to live in. That's what feminism is about. And so it starts in the granular and it extends to the macro.
Yeah. Well, and I think that feminism, at the end of the day, I mean, does also benefit men. So if you're thinking about, well, how does this benefit me? It benefits all, because feminism not only advocates for, women to have the ability to go out on a normal day and not overanalyze what they're going to wear for fear of being sexually assaulted, or for women to have more opportunities in the workplace, or to close the wage gap, or all those things. But feminism also actually advocates against things like toxic masculinity, and the emotional toll that goes on men, where we have the leading cause of death for men under 50 is suicide, because men are under so much stress from these toxic masculine ideals that they're held up to. And that's part of the patriarchy that feminism wants to take down.
That's good.
And so men actually can reap so many benefits from feminism. It is for them as well. I think that a lot of times men and people in general will think that feminism is not for them, largely actually just because of the word.
Yeah.
I think that that's one of the sort of like kind of tragic parts of the label, is that the word feminine is inside of the word feminism. And so it's associated immediately with being for women and women only. But if you look at a term like anti-racist, right? A lot of people can get behind that term because they're saying, oh yeah, I don't want to be racist. Like I don't think being racist is cool. I don't think being racist is a good thing for our society, for our world. I think that we should be equal as races. We are all people. If you use a term like anti-sexist instead of feminist, then maybe more people would come behind it. But part of the issue is that feminist is the like colloquial term that falls under anti-sexist, or there's also like the term pro-feminist instead of just being feminist, which is allowing you to maybe like disassociate yourself slightly from calling yourself feminine, that men will use at times. And so it's sort of unfortunate, the wording that we have for it, but it's also the term that people most widely understand and know. And so it's the term, at least for me, that like I use, right? Yeah. So I think that's one of the flaws, is that we need to reframe the way that we think about feminism, and understanding that just saying feminine in the word doesn't automatically disqualify men. And also, men shouldn't be afraid of calling themselves feminine anyways. Like, we already have that issue, which is another thing that feminism would help eliminate. Is the idea, like, we already have all these toxic ideals that men are insulted by being called women. Like, men are insulted by being told they throw like a girl, or that they're a pussy or whatever. And that's like another thing that feminism is trying to dismantle. And it's another way that men can actually work against that toxic masculine system, is to be okay with taking on a feminine label like feminism.
Yes, I completely agree. There's so much work to be done, right? And that, like, back to what you said about the Emma Watson speech, like, this is your official invitation. Like, we need you. Like, come help influence change on a mass scale that everyone will benefit from. So, I mean, I think, like, sure, there's some weird offshoots of feminism that are very minority and small, but the majority of feminism, this is what it is, right? So
yeah, I mean, at least the feminism I interact with,
the feminism
is so much more welcoming and is advocating for equality for all. And I think that some of that also has to do with like the waves of feminism, and we're currently in 3rd/4th wave feminism, and it's very different from 2nd wave feminism or even 1st wave feminism. And so
no, I agree with you. And I think a lot of the negative connotation with feminism is from 1st and 2nd wave feminism. Not necessarily 3rd wave feminism is how I've kind of described it to people that are maybe a little older and are like, oh, no, not feminism. And I'm just like, whoa. But you're for equality. You're for, and I like ask them these questions and they're like, well, yeah. I was like, so you're very feminist.
Yeah. Like,
and
they're just like, feminist.
And they're just like, I guess.
Well, and I think with that kind of comes the fear that feminism dismantles traditional home values, or that it encourages women to go into the workplace and not have children, or to not be stay-at-home moms because that's like an inferior position.
Or to be lesbians.
Yeah, or feminism tells people to be lesbians and to never have sex with men ever. And we're just like one big cock block. But
that's the real fear here for the men.
We're just
afraid they won't get any.
extra large cock block. No, what it actually, what I think that's fair, because there have been like these waves of feminism have sort of pushed against those traditional values. We've said, no, we don't want to be stay-at-home moms. We're going to be career women. Like, we don't even want children. We don't want any part of that. And I think, like, as the pendulum swings one way and back the other, it, like, eventually settles in the center.
Right.
Which is, I think, any sort of movement is pushing for, is, like, something where, like, it can be accessible to more people, that, you know, stay-at-home moms can be just as feminist as the career woman who's never had kids, or the career woman who has kids and has a stay-at-home husband. You know, like, there's lots of different options there, I think. And I think that's what the evolvement of feminism has created space for. Is that it's more about, like, you can be whatever you want. It's like, this is in support of your pursuit of happiness in whatever form that takes. But we don't want you to be prevented from being that career woman because there's no opportunities for you to step into high positions of power. And we don't want you to be prevented from staying at home because, you know, single income households don't allow for people to live that way anymore. Whatever. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yep.
I mean, I think that it's all about removing obligation, right? Like, we are trying to remove the obligation for women to stay at home and remove the obligation or the expectation that women are going to have children.
And do the laundry and the dishes. And
yes,
make
that
the
women
food
are the homekeepers, or that women are going to have specific kinds of jobs, that women are only teachers or nurses or midwives or whatever, that women aren't qualified to lead a country or to be a doctor or
a CEO.
To be a CEO or a major chef, you know, like which is wild, because we actually see this happen a lot, where women are allowed positions that are, for example, women are meant to be the homekeepers and therefore the chef of the home, right? But most of the top chefs in the world are men. And so women are told, no, you have to cook, you have to clean, you have to do all these things. But the people who actually get elevated in those fields are men at the end of the day. And so even when we talk about these, like, supposed proclivities that women have towards cooking, if we use this example, or the creative arts, you see filmmakers dominantly are men, whereas women are told, oh, you're more artsy, you're more for the soft sciences, you're more for the arts, but they're still not elevated to the highest levels the way that men are in those exact same fields.
Women dominate nonprofits, but CEOs of nonprofits are dominated by men, like those types of things.
Yes, exactly.
Well, actually, women dominate the church.
Yes.
It's about 2/3 of the church and parachurch organizations are women. And we see about probably, I mean, I don't even know the statistic, but a very, very, very high percentage of the leaders within those organizations are men.
Oh, it's the vast majority.
One last point then, before we move on, which is this kind of idea that of the angry feminist. And I think I don't want to, like, debunk her, because I think she's very real.
I agree.
But I do want to debunk that her anger is unfounded or not, like, based in anything,
like,
or that it's hysterical or that it's ridiculous. Because if you look at the injustices in the world, if you look at the statistics on how women are treated, how women experience men, there are many, countless reasons for women to be angry at men. And so that doesn't mean feminism disqualifies men, but that there are very valid reasons for women, feminists, whatever, to be angry. Like, look at our sexual assault statistics. Yeah. We're talking like 1 in 5 women has experienced sexual assault. Probably even more than that have experienced sexual harassment in some form. Like, we're talking very ridiculous, like, and no prosecution. Like, those types of things, I think, are what, I think injustice fuels, like, rebellion, right? Or resistance. And so the resistance that men, I think, experience feels harsh or strong or kind of, like, beyond what is necessary. Like, why can't we all just get along? I don't have anything against you. Why do you have something against me? And I think the hardest part about feminism for men is recognizing one's complicity in that sort of trend. And I'm not talking about just sexual assault. I'm talking about, like, just patriarchal systems in general that are cause for anger, and being able to be angry with us.
Yeah.
Like, I think that's the thing that is missing is like men are allowed to be mad with us that women are sexually assaulted at ridiculously high amounts and have ridiculously low amounts of justice.
Right.
Like, men are allowed to be upset that there are girls going without educations in many countries around the world, and some are even in sort of education debt here in the US. So, like, we're talking about very extreme, serious problems that the feminism movement is fighting against. And so, yes, we are angry. And yes, that is okay. Like, it is okay. I think that it's okay that Black men and women are angry that Black men are disproportionately killed by police. Like, that is something you should be angry about.
Yeah.
And, like, as white people, it's not our job to be like, whoa, don't be so angry about it. We didn't do it to you. Like, that was our ancestors, not us, blah, blah, blah. Like, no, we get to be angry with them that something unjust and horrific is happening to their community.
Yeah. And that comes back to that ally point, right? Of like, that is allying, that is advocating, because like you're with us and understanding where it comes from.
No.
And like, this is, I think, the perfect example for men being able to use their privilege to help influence positive change through accountability with other men, through advocacy, through education. And that is the opportunity that they have. So I'm like, again, join the club. So we also asked some questions. And we left space for that within the survey, which is really fun. So we've got a few that I think are really interesting and important. So one is thoughts on gender roles. Are there any things that should primarily be allocated to men? My thoughts on gender roles. I think gender roles, I don't know what they serve, if that makes sense. So, like, for example, traditionally in a hetero marriage, the man goes to work, makes more money than the woman. Like, what is the point of that? Like, what does that do? How does that help? And statistically, currently, I believe, marriages where the woman makes more money are 50% more likely to end in divorce. And people associate that with, oh, well, like, it's because of his masculine ego or whatever. And I'm like, I mean, maybe, but that just shows to me that, like, maybe you guys, like, had a little bit of weird competition, or like I make more money than James and we literally don't care. Like, it doesn't matter. We both got money to throw in the pot and money to spend. That's great. So I think for gender roles in general, I'm just kind of like, what does it serve? What does that do? Like, shouldn't everyone be able to do what they are best at?
Yeah. I mean, I think that when you see those statistics, like those marriages ending in divorce, to me, that is a product of toxic masculinity. It is a product of ego possibly being bruised because of this like feeling of inferiority because the wife is making more money than the man. I think that that's something that we need to break down when it comes to the feminist cause is hoping to break down those toxic masculine teachings that we give to young men and to boys in telling them that they need to make more money or telling them that they have to be the breadwinner, et cetera, et cetera. Like, that actually, that doesn't work in the society that we're building now.
Well, also, hot take. Maybe the reason that divorces are higher in instances where women make more money is because when women have access to more money and abilities to gain power, they don't feel stuck in unhealthy, toxic marriages.
I think that's very possible. And also, it's something that's hard to even like evaluate because it's so case by case.
Yeah.
But when it comes to gender roles in general, I think that they just don't fall into the way that we're the view of marriage that's being formed in the United States now. There are tasks and there are things that married couples do together, right? You've chosen to be in a partnership. You've chosen to be in this particular arrangement to do your life together, right? And so you divide up responsibilities. Whereas myself, as a single person, I have all the responsibilities on me of everything that happens to make my life function, in everything from feeding myself to keeping my home clean to making enough money to pay rent to making sure that I'm a happy, healthy human, et cetera, et cetera. And I don't see why that would necessarily change if I were married, except that I would then have someone who's helping me, right? Yeah. Like, that doesn't mean that I am now disqualified from making money to pay the rent because I'm married to a man now. Because I've been making money to pay the rent for the past, 10 years, however long I've been, paying rent.
Right.
And so I think it's kind of silly to think that there would be gender roles within a marriage in that way, because people, like, if a person is capable, then they're capable. Exactly. And also, if people have, like you said, different strengths, then, like, the people within that union should play to their strengths and work together to have a better life together. Right?
Yeah.
And when it comes to gender roles in general, I mean, we kind of already touched on this, but, women being told that they can only have certain jobs because of their gender, or men even being told that they can only have certain jobs because of their gender. Men are told they can't be nurses. Men are told that they shouldn't be a teacher, that they shouldn't take on these, like, more soft positions, and are often ridiculed for it. And I think that it's kind of, like, ridiculous to put people into a box that way. And I think that it comes from stereotypes that we've had that stem from the patriarchal system that our culture is built on.
Well, and also I think the question of roles is so cultural, and it's so, like, community-based, and so much of it is defined by, like, what the norms are where you are. And so I think roles exist for sure, but I also think that the freedom for people to push against what is a cultural norm should be allowed and celebrated, I think. Because, men, at least in our society, may have a higher proclivity for STEM work, let's just say. But that shouldn't prevent women who want to take on STEM jobs from getting those jobs or from being able to thrive in those environments. Right. Women in our culture tend to have a higher proclivity towards, teaching, more nurturing sciences, whatever you want to say. I hate it when people say women are more nurturing, but just a little pet peeve of mine. But let's just, like, culturally, I think that's generally true.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean women who aren't nurturing should be disqualified from being able to be successful. And that doesn't mean that women can't move away from that, or that men can't move into those spaces. So I think, like, should gender roles exist? I don't know, but do they? Yeah.
Yeah.
They definitely do exist. Yeah.
And like, it's not wrong, I think, to operate within them if it is something that is right for you. But I think the goal is not necessarily dismantling gender roles. The goal is creating opportunities for people to step outside of them and live life as they see fit for themselves. Yeah. I think that's more how I would answer that, I think.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's like, what works for you? What are your strengths? What works in your relationship? Yeah. Like, those are all things that are very nuanced and that will change drastically from person to person. It's like, what works for me and my husband will probably not work for a lot of people. And that's okay. That doesn't mean it's wrong, but it's right for us. And so that's kind of how I feel about, like, should there be specific things for men? It's like, well, these skill sets that people are good at, people should do, regardless of if they're men or women.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that there's also the thing is like, when you talk about this idea that a certain gender might be more inclined towards a position, like, that all comes from the cultural mindsets that we've been raised with, right? So, like, women have been told for the past, several thousand years, you are the nurturers, you are the childbearers, you are the ones who are taking care of this. And in some sense, it made more sense when we were in a less industrialized society, right? Like, when we were in a less industrialized society, we had women giving birth, and women were unable to do as much work while pregnant, and women were unable to be separated from their children while nursing. And so men were that burden of providing for the family was put onto the man of the family, right? But women were also not given the opportunity to learn how to read or the opportunity to pursue any sort of other, vocation outside of parenting. And so I think that there are certain reasons why these gender roles have been put in place that make sense from like an evolutionary and historical standpoint. But at the same time, we are not in that same kind of society now. We are able to provide childcare to children while women go to work. We are able to, women are allowed to be educated now. Women are allowed to pursue these other opportunities. And so we have to break down the idea that women are only nurturing because women actually are afforded the opportunity to not be nurturing in that same way anymore. And I think that we also have to break down the idea that men must not be nurturing, because there's so many men that would love to be a stay-at-home dad. There are so many men that would love to spend more time with their children or who would prefer that over a full-time job in the same way that they used to have the pressure to do. And so this idea that like there's certain proclivities that these people have, I think it was more a necessity of distributing the burden of family in the past. And now we have to move forward and evolve with our society, evolve with technology, evolve with all the different opportunities and the ways that we can function as family units now. And like it's kind of ridiculous to still hold on to those things when so much has changed.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like, I think culturally, those things will always exist. I feel like no matter how far along we progress, there's always going to be some kind of expectation or obligation placed on people based on either their gender or their age or like their height or their skin color or like whatever. Like I think we can dream of a world where there's no obligation and people can just be whoever they want to be and blah, blah, blah. But realistically, culture is always going to play a role in deciding someone's future and like how they move forward with that. And so I think it's more about like, can we create freedom now for people to push against some of those boundaries as it has limited them? And less about like, can we just destroy the traditional understanding of gender roles, period? I mean, like maybe someday what we know now of gender roles will disappear in that sense, but there's going to be other roles, obligations then. So it's like.
Yeah. I mean, I think that people love like compartmentalize and segmenting people to better understand how society works, right? And to better wrap their minds around it and to make order and sense out of chaos.
Yeah.
And so I think that people like assigning something like gender roles because it brings that sense of order and of sort of knowing what's what, right? And we've seen like past gender roles be totally eliminated in certain cultures. Like we see now that women are no longer considered property in the United States. And that's incredible. Women are considered full human beings according to the law now. And that is on paper. And that is great, right? We are not told that we are property anymore. And that was a huge breakdown of a long-standing gender role that had been around for several thousand years. And so I think you're right, like in the future, quote unquote, gender roles may look radically different from what we think of gender roles right now. And maybe they're not necessarily even gender roles at that point. Maybe it's some other kind of role, but it's a way of assigning people. And it's something that we as a human race constantly have to work through and have to like come to terms with things that are against what we think of as the quote unquote norm.
Yeah.
There you go. There's what Woman Being thinks about gender roles.
There's like one long, complicated, and whatever answer to that question.
Yeah.
But it's complicated.
It's complicated.
Are we ever not?
Are we ever like not,
Is there anything straightforward?
No. But that's okay. That's why we have this podcast.
Yeah. A lot of gray.
Yeah.
So this is an interesting question that I feel like we've touched on. But how do you balance women's rights while also honoring and valuing what men have to bring? I would say women's rights is not dishonoring men. It's more holding men accountable. For example, Kelly earlier mentioned the sexual assault rate right now. A lot of those sexual assault cases never go to court, or the man isn't convicted, or if he is convicted, he serves very limited jail time. There's all kinds of statistics on that. It is not me dishonoring a man saying you have to pay an adequate sentence for your crime that you committed against another human being. So I think of it that way. I don't think of it as dishonoring. I think of it as accountability, which really in the long run is honoring.
Mm-hmm. No, that's true, because if we don't call them out, they can't change, they can't grow. The reason that sexual assault rates are so high is that men can get away with it.
Yeah.
There are no consequences.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so there's no need for them to understand consent, or no need for them to be concerned about whether or not something that they're doing is lawful or okay or wanted by the other person, because they have a lot of power to just do whatever they want in that realm.
Absolutely.
And that's not healthy for men.
No.
That does not create good, life-giving, society-building men.
No.
That creates power-hungry, dangerous, toxic masculine men, right? And so if feminism is about evening the playing field, it's also about dismantling some of those things that have allowed, evil into our society, if you want to call it that.
Yeah, I think it's just the idea that saying something is unacceptable doesn't mean that we're dishonoring you or being disrespectful. It's saying, hey, you're out of line. Hopefully you can come get in line and participate.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that feminism actually very much so honors men, in that it honors their humanity in the same way that it honors women's humanity. But also when I feel I hear the argument where it's why are you so focused on women? Why does gender matter here? We should just be focused on equality for all, not just focusing on equality for women and that kind of thing. And it reminds me of that argument. And the thing is that gender matters here because that's what we're focusing on in this moment as we talk about feminism, right? It's this. And people are well, men have hardships too. Men have things that happen to them too. Yeah, men do have hardships. Men do have things that are rough. Men do have ways that they are hurt, or ways that they have been disadvantaged. Sure. But it's saying, well, why are you researching a cure for cancer when there are heart attacks happening every day? And it's well, the thing is we're looking for a cure for cancer because cancer is a problem and cancer is a big issue. And we are not invalidating that heart attacks happen. But hopefully, as we as a medical society, a medical group, work towards a cure for cancer, it's actually going to lead to medical advancements that will help all people, that will help possibly also lead to a cure for heart attacks. These medical advancements are actually good for everyone. And just because we're focusing in on a cure for cancer doesn't mean that we don't acknowledge that heart attacks happen. Doesn't mean that we don't care about heart attacks. It means that that's our focus here, and that's the issue that we're honing in on, and that actually these issues intersect, and that a solution for one is a benefit to all.
Well, and I think speaking of heart attacks, it serves to acknowledge that there are some systems in place in our country that are disadvantaged for men. We could talk about the draft. We could talk about giving up children's rights. Oh my God. What do you call that? Parental rights. Parental rights. Yeah. Men are disadvantaged in that area. We see it a lot. That's the only two examples I can think of.
Men are more likely to be convicted for a crime.
Yes, men are more likely to be put in prison, but not for sexual assault, but other things.
Yeah.
Not for that, but for everything else.
Yeah.
And so, there are systems in society that disadvantage men. But if you have to look at the majority numbers. You have to look at the opportunities that a man with zero money has to making it to the top compared to a woman. And even a white man against other gender or races, there's huge trends here. And because one injustice here is happening, it doesn't invalidate the reality of a bigger injustice.
Yeah. Yeah. Or even if you look at, for example, when we're talking about qualification, right? This is probably a pretty hot take.
Hot take.
Go for it. I love it.
In the 2016 election, right, we had Hillary Clinton versus Donald Trump.
Mm-hmm.
And I would argue that the more on paper qualified candidate did not win because
1000%.
because of their gender. And if you look at Donald Trump's political qualifications at that point in time, they were next to none. If you look at Hillary Clinton, who had served as Secretary of State under President Obama, who was the First Lady of the United States, who has this lengthy and easily observable political career, she did not win that election. And I think a huge factor in that was gender. And so when you look at something like that happening, it's hard for me to say that across the board we need to be focusing on men's rights being advocated for. Which, again, to reiterate, feminism actually does advocate for men to have rights, and feminism actually does include men having like a more equitable system when it comes to the criminal justice system, when it comes to how men are treated when there is a separation of parents. Like, I truly believe that feminism advocates for that as well, but the biggest trends that we see, and the 2016 election just being one example of that, is that women are we need a stool. We need a stool to look over the fence.
Yeah.
And you look even at the 2020 election, the way to beat Trump was to bring another white man into the position to be elected. Like, that is a huge reason why Biden was put forth as a Democratic candidate, was because he was seen as the only option that could actually beat Trump, when there were so many women who were coming forward to run for the Democratic candidacy, who were very qualified, who were very well-spoken, but who simply could not win because they were against a man. It seems very simple to me when you think about it that way.
Well, and I think one of the number one complaints that we hear about men, from men, about like sort of the feminism movement is like, oh, I'm not going to have an opportunity, or an unqualified person is going to be put in a position that I was qualified for because, you know, they're a woman or they're a minority or whatever. And I'm like, this drives me crazy because I literally see unqualified men put into positions of power every day.
Literally.
Every day.
Left and right, guys. It's left and right.
I literally sit here with my qualified self and my career experience, and I shut my mouth and I wait, because it doesn't matter what kind of education that I have. It doesn't matter how much experience that I have. Men are going to get first dibs. They just are. They have the friendships with the people who are making the decisions.
Yeah. They're in the boys' club.
They're in the boys' club. And so the whole argument that like, oh no, what if we put a black person in a position but they're not actually qualified, and there was a perfectly qualified white man that could have taken it? And I'm like, calm down. There's unqualified white men everywhere.
Literally.
All sorts of positions of power all over the place. And so you have plenty of opportunity to go where you want to go. That's what I'm saying.
Well, and also it is a either sexist or racist assumption to think that you would be putting someone who's unqualified, who's not what you've typically seen in power. Yeah. You know, so I heard people argue when President Biden came into the presidency that he was being racist or sexist towards white men because he was promoting and elevating people of color and women in his cabinet. Yeah. And those people who he put into his cabinet were 100% qualified for the positions they were being put into. He was just taking initiative to bring them into that position that they hadn't formally been allowed the opportunity to. Yeah. And the opportunity was not prevented from them because they were disqualified or because they didn't have enough experience. It wasn't afforded to them because they weren't part of the club, because they weren't the figure of what people expect to see in power, which is in our country and in our current Western society that favors white men and that is patriarchal at its core. those are the people that they expect to see in power, and those are the people that they automatically assume have qualification.
Yes.
And then the people who don't look like them, people assume don't have qualification, despite credits that they do have.
It's a really unfortunate automatic assumption and very racist and sexist in roots that has been made and continues to prevail somehow, despite like literal data.
Literal data.
So, to clarify, does that mean we hate white men? No. But yes, I am jealous of the white men next to me with X amount of experience that is minute to mine who is put in positions of power ahead of me. Yes. And I'm angry about that. And that's okay.
Yeah.
That is why we do what we do.
So I guess the short answer is men are honored every single day.
Every day is Men's Day.
Every day is Men's Day. So moving right along, we got a few answers to this final question, and it is, what do you assume about feminists? So the audience, they get to submit any assumptions they have, which I was very excited. I wanted more juicy stuff. They didn't come at us, but that's okay. So they often have defensive perceptions of men's actions or motives.
That is an assumption about
feminists.
feminists.
That is an assumption about feminists.
They have defensive perception of men's actions or motives.
Like, meaning we come across as defensive.
Towards men's actions and motives.
Like we're defending men?
No, like we are defensive towards them.
Like we're assuming wrong to men. We are assuming the worst of men, essentially. I mean, I think that it comes down to science, right? So
it's just the facts. It's just the science.
But like if you observe a phenomenon happen over and over again, scientifically, you can come to the conclusion that that is going to continue to happen. That's just the way that, scientific observation works. And so if I've observed over and over again men sexually harassing women, if I've observed over and over again men catcalling me, men treating me like less than a person, men looking to the man next to me instead of me when talking, when asking for money, when somebody, when a waiter hands the check and assumes that it's the man who's going to pay. Like, when all of these things happen, I can look at that data that is observable in my real life and also in the stories of other women that I hear, and I can say, yes, I have come to the conclusion that there is a problem when it comes to the way that men treat women. That does not mean that I am constantly assuming the worst about men. I love men. I date men. I have friends that are men. I love my father and my brother and my stepfather and my uncles and my grandpa. Like, I have so many men in my life that I cherish. But that does not mean that I'm going to ignore the observable truth that I've seen of the ways that men trend in treating women that creates an inequality. And so, yes, I might at times assume, quote unquote, assume the worst about a man who is a stranger, or about a man who I'm hearing about who is a politician, or about a man who's being accused of sexual assault. Yeah, I'm going to probably assume that they did it because I've seen an observable trend that tells me that assumption is likely to be right. And so I think that's logical to an extent. So sure, you could say from that frame of view, yeah, I'm going to assume the worst about men, but that doesn't mean that I'm a man hater or that I think that all men are the same,
Well, and I think ignorance plays a big role in it too. Like, if you come into a situation saying the same old thing that all the real sexist men say, you're going to sound and look a lot like a sexist. And so even if your intentions are like good or like not malicious, if you look and act and conduct yourself in the same way that like not great guys do, like Emma said, it's only logical.
Yeah. Looks like a duck, sounds like a duck. It's probably a duck.
Yeah. And so
that's logical.
Yeah. And so it's about like, this is less about like, are we overly defensive? And it's more about, are you taking the time to understand and counteract the current status quo?
Yeah. And like, it's not like I approach every man that I interact with and think, he's probably going to be a sexist or he's probably going to sexually harass me. But there are things that like indicate to me whether or not somebody is safe, you know? There are things that indicate to me whether or not somebody is trustworthy.
Has my best interest in mind.
And so, like, I'm going to take those into stock. And also, like, again, if so many things have been observable, then at a certain point, you're going to disqualify some people based off of certain things.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. And I think it's also about perceived defense. For example, if a waiter comes over to the table and hands the check to James instead of placing it in the middle of the table, and I point it out, is that me being defensive or just letting him know, hey, like, you could actually set it in the middle of the table and let whoever is going to grab the check. Like, or I think of another example. One time in the workplace, someone called me Bride of James, like we're in The Handmaid's Tale. And I was like, I don't belong to him.
Of James.
But I wasn't like being mean. It's just like, hey, like,
what the heck?
You might have meant that nice, but it comes across real weird. And I think that's okay. And I think people need to be willing to, like, receive that. And maybe they're not, maybe men in particular aren't used to receiving that type of feedback from women. And so it feels defensive, but I'm just, like, saying something that's fact, you know? And so maybe men just aren't used to it. And so it feels weird.
Well, and also maybe women are just absorbing all sorts of sexist comments all the time, every day. And every once in a while, we deserve a chance to point it out.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, and, like, what's wrong with that, too?
Yeah.
You know?
And I get it. Like, defensiveness is not it's not the road to connection and, like, whatever, cohesion, or I don't know. But I think, A, yes, it could be perceived as defensiveness when really it's just accountability.
Yeah.
And B, like, maybe it's okay that we're a little defensive after, like, the barrage of shit that we deal with all the time. I don't know.
Yeah, totally. Well, and I'm like, we can't be expected to be, like, perfect all the time. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, if it's like, wow, this is, like, the final misogynist, like, piece of, like, the needle that broke the camel's back, like, it is what it is. Like, but I do try to, like, check myself and be like, oh, like, no, I'm not going to say this way. I'm going to say it this way because I wouldn't want this person to perceive I'm attacking them. I still need the benefit of our relationship or whatever. But also, like, this is a boundary. Mm-hmm. So.
Boundaries are uncomfortable.
They are. They should make you a little uncomfortable.
But yeah, no, you're right. Like, this is the idea is not, like, feminists don't need to be, I don't know, accommodating. But I think the idea is that they are people too. And they're trying to do their best to navigate the world and also, like, get their fair share and advocate for others. And yeah. So I don't know. I don't know what the answer to that is. Maybe it's just to approach things with a little bit more humility and, like, ask questions rather than, like, just repeat things that you've always believed or known. I don't know. Like, I can understand how it feels like a landmine of, I don't know what I can say or can't say. And I get that. I know how that feels. Because there's a lot of people groups that I'm not. So I know exactly what it's like to try and, like, navigate conversations with people who have a different life experience, especially when it's politicized and made more volatile. But I think it's easy to just step carefully and ask humbly and seek understanding rather than, like, trying to be able to do it the way that you've always done it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that people often bristle at the idea of receiving feedback or receiving something that goes against maybe what they've already always known. And so I think that's a natural human proclivity, but that it's okay to open yourself up to to being wrong. Yeah. And we need to be more comfortable with being wrong. Mm-hmm. And I think that just because someone is letting you know that something was offensive to them or that something was hurtful to them, that doesn't mean that they're attacking you. Mm-hmm. I think that so much of it does have to do with relationship and whether or not you're in relationship with these people. And honestly, if you're trying to genuinely broaden your horizons and understand people more, seek out relationships that are different from you. Mm-hmm. And that's going to bring a lot more quote unquote landmines where you don't know what's the right thing to say. But if you're in relationship with other people who are different from you, you also have the ability to, again, like, ask what is the right thing to do here? tell them, I don't know what to do here, and I want to know how to do better. And understanding that you actually have a small frame of reference for the human experience, and that you can learn how to interact with people who have very different frames of reference from you by just getting to know them more and by exposing yourself and by putting yourself into those situations. And so that's something that I've learned over the years. There's, again, like you said, Kelly, there's so many different human experiences that are not my own. And so relating to other people actually breeds for less of that quote unquote defensiveness, because you're gaining understanding about other people's perspectives and you're gaining, maybe like, a mile in their shoes. And so I think that change is hard. And I think that hearing that you're wrong is hard, or hearing that you might have done something hurtful is hard, because there's so many people that don't intend to hurt people, but that do, because they were raised a certain way, because they are used to a certain way of doing things. And at the same time, they have access to information. They have access to education. They have access to the internet and books and all sorts of different things that are going to show them, teach them more about other people. And so it's not always really our responsibility to educate them about those things. Yeah. And it can get really tiring to educate them about those things. And sometimes I just don't want to, respond to every single, sexist comment that's made around me.
I can say we don't want to be a buzzkill just as much as you don't want us to be a buzzkill, or even more. Yeah. And so when we do be a buzzkill, it's because we've taken a great load of effort to step out beyond our norm.
Yeah. It's not fun.
No.
At the end of the day, like, it is an act of coming together as a society and like building understanding amongst people that are different from you. That actually is going to bring down people's defenses and allow people to have understanding for one another.
I agree. I couldn't agree more. Our final assumption that was submitted to us is that many feminists don't try to see men's side of the conversation. I think I can see how people might assume that, but I think most feminists have gotten to the point they're at is because they're very tired of only hearing the man's side of the conversation. I would say that they feel underrepresented by the man's side of the conversation. And that's why we feel the need to speak out and be vocal and advocate. And believe it or not, men are pretty much still the dominant voice in our culture. And so we kind of can't not hear their side of the conversation.
That's the thing. We know the men's side of the conversation in a lot of respects. Like, I'm not going to be naive and say that I know all of a man's side of the conversation and know all of the hardships that a man could possibly interact with or anything like that. But we've heard a lot of it, and we have grown up with the understanding that we must actually operate within a male dominant system. And like, that's what patriarchy is a system that's favoring men. And so it's not that we don't want to hear the man's side of the conversation. I think it's that's not the conversation right now. It's that we are advocating for equality for all, and men in our nation and in our Western culture have had so many privileges afforded to them, that equality for all is not as focused on them. It's focused on women. It's focused on trans people, queer people. It's focused on people of color. And that's because they're the people who have been discredited, disenfranchised, and oppressed. And so the idea of like, oh, they're not listening to the man's side of the conversation, it makes me ask the question, like, are men listening to what the conversation is? Like, are men understanding that this is a conversation about human rights and about people being afforded equal opportunity? This isn't a question about whether or not men have hard things happen to them or whether or not men can be part of the conversation. Like we said, we want them to be part of it. We want them really badly to be part of it, actually. But that's not the conversation.
Yeah, and I think I feel like for any man out there that feels unheard, you're not. You're not. We've heard, like our entire political system is made up of men. Our entire media system is made up of primarily men. Our Hollywood, books, etc., art, culture, all of the main cultural leaders in the world that are communicating things to the world are men. And all the women that are in those spaces are women operating within a male society. And so I think we know the language. And that is not to, again, claim we've got it all figured out. But, and that is not to say that you don't have a voice in the conversation. But it is to say, what is the side that you're talking about? Because that is the side that we talk about every day.
Also, the whole idea of the man's side of the conversation is almost, to me, that's a fallacy in and of itself. Because
aren't we on the same side?
Yeah. In my mind, we are on the same side. We are, again, and we're harping this point home just over and over again, but feminism is about equality and equity and equal opportunity for all. And so what is man's side of the conversation? The side is, do you believe that people deserve human rights, people deserve to be treated with dignity and respect, that people deserve to have opportunities in all the different realms of society that we've talked about? We are on the same side. If you don't think those things are necessary, if you don't think those things are worth advocating for, then I don't think that's the man's side of the argument. I think that that's a whole different side of the argument that is made up of all sorts of people. And there is that side.
And there's women on it.
Yeah. And that's the thing, is that I don't think that saying that they don't listen to the man's side of the argument, it kind of breaks my heart a little bit, because to me, it shows sort of a misunderstanding of what feminism is and a misunderstanding of where they get to contribute, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good.
I couldn't agree more. I think, basically the answer is, men, we actually want you in the conversation. So what conversation are you having that you feel unhearded? Because we hear you. We do. So I guess all this into consideration, final few questions. Can men be feminists, and can men benefit from feminism?
If you don't know the answer, go back and listen again. Because
rinse and repeat.
Maybe you didn't hear our side of the conversation. No, I'm just kidding. Yes, and yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, period.
Period.
I feel like we've really driven that point home.
Yes to all of the above.
Yeah. Feminism benefits all.
Yep.
And men should want feminism because it is going to benefit them at the end of the day.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I often joke that my husband is more feminist than me, because he encourages me and pushes me in ways that I think I am disqualified from because of whatever conditioning. And he's like, actually, no, that's not true. Get out there. Go get him, Tiger. And I'm like, okay. So truthfully, we need feminist men in our lives. It's very important. And they can help support us and even check us in ways that we might not think of.
Yeah. There's nothing hotter than a feminist man.
Let me tell you. Oh, yeah.
I love a good feminist man.
You have a good
For
feminist
sure.
man.
Ow.
So as we're kind of wrapping up this discussion around feminism, if men can be feminists, if feminism benefits men, what are the myths around feminism? I mean, good Lord, we talked about a lot. But
Important stuff.
You better be taking notes. But what are our hopes for where feminism will lead us? What do we hope that the world will gain from feminism?
An idyllic, just, and perfect society. I think that feminism is necessary as long as we live in a patriarchy. And that meaning that as long as we have a system of government, as long as we have a culture, as long as we have a society that defaults to men, that is built on male power, we need feminism. And I think that my hopes for feminism is that it leads towards a more just and equal society, that it leads to people not questioning whether women or anyone is qualified to do something because of their gender. I think that feminism in its most perfect state is intersectional, which is something we touched on a little bit, but feminism has historically left out people who are lower class, people who are in poverty, people who are of different races, who are not white women, who are wealthy. And I think that my hope for feminism is that it becomes more and more intersectional and more inclusive. My hope is that feminism spreads around the world and allows for women in other nations where women have way less rights and way less opportunities than we do here in the United States, that it spreads to those places and brings liberation and more free societies all over the world. And that the ultimate hope for feminism is that there's not a question about whether a woman can do something, and there's not a question about whether, we should provide healthcare to women. There's not a question about whether women should be able to sustainably manage their menstrual cycle. There's not a question about whether a woman should be elected to a presidency where it's not a big deal. That's the ultimate hope,
Yeah.
I couldn't have said it better myself. I think women have a lot of value to bring to this earth, and I think that we've been prevented from sharing what we're fully capable of. And I see a future where where my daughters and sons and whoever, I don't know, all people, can reach for anything, reach for the stars and go after it and not be prohibited based on their sex.
Yeah.
And I think the more we come together, the more women in leadership, in positions of power, in wealth, in all corners of society, the more equity for all people that we will have. The more we'll dismantle those harmful things that affect men. The more we'll dismantle harmful things that affect minorities and people of color. And it's all together.
Yeah.
And so.
Yeah, I agree. I was going to say, I hope for a world that I am very proud to bring a daughter into, or a son, or that, she would be safe in, that she doesn't have to worry about walking home with her keys between her fingers, or if, something were to happen and she become pregnant or need an abortion, that's not a question, that she have rights, that she have the opportunity, that she be able to amount to any dream she might have in her beautiful heart, and that men feel like they have space to come alongside her, and that they can support her and advocate for her as well, and that she in turn can advocate for them, right? That there's equality and equity. So, yep, just those few little things.
Just something light.
Just
for whenever you're listening to this,
Just like a casual Sunday afternoon.
Just some season 3 musings. That's all.
Well, I mean, we're off to a great start. We're going to have a great season.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're all very excited to be back in the studio and to keep bringing the content that the people want.
That the people are just begging.
Just
here's the thing.
On their knees.
What do the people want? We want to know.
We want to know. So freaking follow us on Instagram so you can tell us what you want. We are here
do it.
for the conversation, the connection, the discourse. That's why we started this. I mean, basically our entire podcast outline today was from you guys. So thank you so much for those that contributed. And if you didn't, that sucks, but you better catch us next time because we'll have it again.
Well, and not only that was the podcast outline written by you, the listener, but the podcast topic was suggested by you, the listener. It was by men who wanted to know, how do I navigate toxic masculinity? What does it mean? What is feminism? Is there space for me? And so that is why we did that.
Yeah.
Why we sat down today to talk about this very thing.
So thank you
You
for
guys
showing
did
up
this.
and contributing to the conversation. Make sure that you are following us on all the podcast platforms because we are on Spotify, we're on Apple, we're on Amazon, we're on Amazon Music. I don't know how those two are different, but I think they are. We're on Stitcher,
Kind of,
we're on
maybe.
YouTube. You can follow us everywhere. Make sure you're liking, following, subscribing, and please give us a review because it actually really, really helps us out. So
we'd appreciate it.
without further ado, we'll catch you next week.
Bye.
Bye.